Hey guys, welcome back to True Crime Tuesday. It's me, Megan Fox. I write with pjmedia.com. I am an investigative journalist, author, and broadcaster. Thanks for being here and welcome to Legal Vices Chat. Legal Vices is here with us today. Hey Jeff, thanks for popping in here after our 2-hour rant stream over on your channel. Solomon Anderson is here. He's Zachary Anderson's brother. And we all watched that trial. I'm still not caught up. I'm like on day 7. And we watched it with, disbelief. We really did, because so little evidence and so much injustice, so much the prosecution got away with. But before we get into it, I have to say, we have been sitting for 2 hours, and I know my audience. My audience, if they sit around for too long, they get fat, Jeff. So we can't do that. We have to start out the program with a little encouragement from Nick Rekieta, because I gained 5 pounds over spring break, and that's entirely unacceptable. Unacceptable, folks. I didn't lose 25 pounds to gain 5 of them back. So just join me for a minute and 22 seconds, because we're going to do our squats, and then we're going to get to the actual interview of the day. All right, here we go. Get the blood pumping. We've been sitting for 2 hours.
You impose fatness on you. You did it by going, oh, I want the butter on the popcorn. Oh, I want the butter on the ice cream. Oh, I want the butter on the sandwich. Oh, I want the butter on the salad. Stop eating butter. Can you just get up, walk 1 mile? Do squats! Walk farther. And if you can't walk, crawl, roll, get dragged by a goddamn forklift. Whatever is wrong with you, just move. Ever get off the chair, get off the couch. No one is coming to service you while you sink into that furniture, while you become one with the pleather your poor ass got on that Walmart couch. Can you try not floating into sadness? Stop eating, stop drinking, start walking, start doing anything that you haven't been doing, you fat piece of shit.
Jeff, you didn't do any squats. You just sat there the whole time. I saw you.
I did, because I came from an hour at the gym after I got off work and got home. I can't do squats. I did enough earlier. I can't move. I hurt. I wasn't
right.
drinking myself into oblivion like some people do, Megan Fox.
The chat has brought to my attention. Okay, so that happened, but whatever. The chat has brought it to my attention that I'm a moron, and I made the title of this Zachary Anderson. His name is Zachariah. I'm so sorry. That was a oversight. I'm going to fix it right now. I'll go into the studio and change it. Sorry, Solomon. I've had a rough night. It was a rough night last night. I killed one bottle of wine by myself, and I shouldn't have. And then my brain didn't work this morning. So that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But I will change that right now. That's embarrassing. This wasn't how I wanted this to begin. All right. Coming to the program now, despite insults and spelling mistakes, is Solomon Anderson. Thank you for being here so much. Sorry for all that. I hope you liked our squat break.
I mean, it just brought me back to my childhood, really, seeing the 80s aerobics.
It was a good time. It was a happier time.
Yeah.
It was a lot easier time, and I like to reminisce about it. But Solomon, thanks so much for being here. We watched what happened to your brother at the hands of our justice system, and we all feel, at least everybody I've talked to in, law adjacent community, has been horrified by what we've seen. And I'm starting to believe that Kyle Rittenhouse got so lucky that it was just a miracle that he was found not guilty with the state of our justice system and our juries. And I wanted Jeff to be here because he actually sat through every minute of it, and I'm only through day 7. But I wrote down a few things, the top 3 so far of things that I thought went horribly wrong. And for those of you who are not aware of this case, Zachariah Anderson was accused of murdering his ex-girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, really, because they weren't really together when he was missing, I guess. Ex-girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. And also he was found guilty. There's no body, very little evidence. Everything is circumstantial. And the judge just let everything prejudicial in. So I wrote 3 things that really bothered me. On day 4, we had the burden shifting argument from the prosecution, where they wanted to tell the jury that the defense could have tested the things that the police didn't test, thus shifting the burden of proof to the defense. And somehow the defense lost that argument and the judge allowed it, which I'm like, I don't even understand. The second thing that I thought was huge and bad was introducing the Zach's drug or marijuana operation to the jury, totally prejudicial, had nothing to do with the case. They allowed it in. And then the argument that I just watched, I think it was day 6 and 7, where they argue for hours and hours and hours about triple hearsay. And I still don't know what happened there. Was that allowed in? Jeff, do you remember? Did they allow the triple hearsay in?
Well, let me ask, which triple hearsay was it you're referring to?
Which time?
Okay.
Yeah.
This would be the one where the friends of Sadie's, I think they were friends of Sadie's, heard from her that Rosalio told her that if anything happened to him, it would be this guy that did it. It would be Zachariah that did it. Just triple hearsay. Some dinner that the defense wasn't made aware of, that these people were all at, and found out the day of that this was coming in. What did the judge decide there? Was that allowed in?
I don't even recall.
God.
I don't remember them going into any depth about a dinner where they all attended, but they did specifically bring on Erica Saylor, Brandon Hendrickson, and Michael Campbell, that all corroborated hearsay evidence about what potentially Rosalio had said to them in regard to Zach. And I mean, there's no proof of it. There's no text messages. There's nothing that was ever presented, that actually demonstrated any conversation or anything that they had pulled off of Mr. Gutierrez's phone that was presented in the court that verified that. So I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but realistically, it's up to the jury to decide whether or not an individual testifying on the stand is providing factual evidence. But in this circumstance, the big question is this something that is verified at any point by anyone other than the fact that these people had testified about it as individual conversations and not as that they had been together talking about this? Because they also let in Mr. Gutierrez's ex-girlfriend and employer, the one that had him working on her properties, who said flippantly that he had talked to her about it while they were on the job site with no witness around at all. Absolutely hearsay. But I mean, the judge just allowed absolutely everything possible in to try and paint a picture of my brother's malevolence, and it didn't bode for a fair trial at any point. And I mean, we kind of expected this going into the trial, especially after the dismissal of the Denny argument and a few of the other decisions and rulings that were made prior to the first day, prior to jury selection.
Well, see, I think that's a big problem that we're starting to see in the courts. We saw it in the Murdoch trial, where the judges seem to be inclined to just let it all in, and if there's a problem, the appeals courts can sort it out. I don't know if there is an actual trend, but at least from what we're seeing in the publicized trials, that seems to be a trend that we're going down. Is just let it in and let the appellate courts sort it out, which is.
That is so nuts to me.
Well, and it comes on the heels of Schrader making a point at the beginning that this entire process is supposed to be biased in favor of the defendant. And I failed to see any of that in action during this trial.
That was actually one of my... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I'm just agreeing with Jeff. He was completely biased in favor of the prosecution, and that was very obvious.
I mean, I was kind of dumbfounded by that statement when he came out and said that the legal system errs on the side of the defendant, that the prosecution works with a disadvantage. But if you consider the mountain of what resources the state has at their disposal to bring a case against an individual citizen, I could not disagree more. I mean, realistically, in the case, we had the judge allowing the shifting of burden of proof. We had the prosecution gets first and last say. The defense can't defend, what the prosecution says or lies about it, in closing statements or in evidence that's presented as a counterpoint to the defense's, argument against them. They also aren't allowed to, independently investigate with as much prejudice as the prosecution can. They don't have the police force on their side that can subpoena people and bring them in and get information and force information out of people. They have to work with generally what people are willing to give them. So people have to agree to interviews and providing information to, the investigators and the PIs that are talking and interviewing on behalf of the defense. And then they have to rely on the discovery that the state has built. And in my brother's case, they had put the blinders on so tightly and only investigated him that they didn't have exculpatory evidence because they never looked or considered anyone else as a possibility in this circumstance. How can you defend someone with no evidence on anyone else and no ability to subpoena and get evidence, exculpatory evidence, without the police being there to fight for that information? It's a tremendous disadvantage, for the defense. And on top of that, piled up with our modern dialogue or our modern society and how we trial by mob, trial by media, we have, headlines that are written for clicks so we can monetize the misery of people in the populace. How is it possible that when every piece of information that's provided to the public, provided to possible jurors, is so completely inundated with the assumption of guilt of the defendant?
Yeah, I have a problem with saying that the court is tilted in the favor of the defense as well, because the prosecution also has an unlimited budget. They have a working relationship with the judge that you could clearly see in this case. There were all kinds of inside jokes between Schrader and Gravely, which I found inappropriate and cringy. And Schrader, to me, was a really good judge. And still, in comparison to some judges that we've seen, he is someone who at least listens to arguments and doesn't dismiss, he lets them, both sides argue the points, but he still sides with the prosecution almost every time, even though he allows some of these arguments to go on for an hour. It's incredible. It's like, how do you not have your mind made up at this point? Especially when there's established case law. But I think the part for me where I was banging my head against a wall was that argument over burden shifting. This idea that somehow the defense shares some of the burden to prove Zachariah's innocence was so egregious to me. I thought it should have been mistrialed right then and there. Like, oh, I'm sorry. We stumbled into an alternative universe where the defense has to prove the client's innocence, and our constitutional rights have been violated, and this should be over. I'm at a loss to understand how we've fallen so far with our justice system.
Well, I think it's because we just give lip service to the principles that are the foundation of the trial system, of the court system, of justice in America. And one of them is, like we were just talking about, this whole idea that things should be biased in favor of the defense. Absolutely it should. Mm-hmm. And again, we always have the catchphrase,
it's not really true.
They're innocent until proven guilty. We had the Florida ice cream guy, the defense lawyer, in his statements made a great thing, and I've corrected my vocabulary now. He said it is not innocent until proven guilty. It is innocent unless proven guilty, which I think is a very, very important distinction, because until actually implies that it's going to happen at some point.
It is.
I mean, and as far as Schrader goes, he also let the lawyers, deliberate and argue, litigate in front of the jury multiple times. So there are multiple occasions where Gravely still got the message to the jury that he wanted to get to them regardless, because Schrader didn't kick the jury out in order to clear the air about the disagreement about an objection or whatever it was. So you just had, as they say, like the bell can't be unrung.
Exactly.
And it was just over and over and over again through the trial that he just kept letting him ring the bell. Even to the point of having an already ruled on stipulation where he couldn't refer to the police canine unit as a cadaver dog, but he continued to refer to it as thus in front of the jury. Yeah. It was a clear misrepresentation of the facts. They never found a body. There was no cadaver. There was nothing that they found in the burn pit. They never found anything that connected my brother to Mr. Gutierrez other than this hypothetical spot of DNA in the back of his van, which, for the record, nothing tested positive of blood in that van. Nothing.
Right. And that's the thing is we say, jury disregard that, strike.
You can't.
That's
and Schrader thinks that a jury instruction will cure everything. That's his go-to for everything. And the prosecutor knew it. Gravely knew it. And so every time he would be close to losing an argument, he would go, well, we're fine with a stipulation to the jury, Your Honor. We're fine if we think an instruction on this will easily clear it up. And Schrader would then be like, yeah, okay. Like, you can't take that. Jurors are not judges.
No.
They don't have the ability to forget what they just heard and to throw it out because they don't have the legal understanding of why that's important. A judge, on the other hand, does. If you were to give an instruction to a judge and say, you can't use that, the judge understands and then doesn't use it if he's a good judge. A jury, on the other hand, no. And that goes back to what Joe was ranting about the other day, which is that juries don't have training. They don't have any training or legal expertise to understand this. My sister, who's an appellate attorney and also she does other law as well, but she has said to me on multiple occasions, if I were to ever be in a situation where I was going to be in front of a judge, I would not choose a jury trial. I would choose the judge, because 9 times out of 10, you're getting a more fair decision from a judge. Of course, it always depends on the judge.
What you say is important, because it continues on with what we've been saying. It's these legal fictions. They're not fictions, but they've become fictions. This, that things are prejudiced in favor of the defendant, that you can unring the bell. And it goes even back further to that, where it's this idea that people are human. And we've been trained to think, well, the cops just wouldn't arrest somebody for no reason. Well, the district attorney just wouldn't prosecute someone without evidence. Well, they wouldn't actually bring them to trial if they didn't do something wrong.
I think one of my favorite moments.
That is how you started.
I think one of my favorite moments was when defense counsel, I think it was the man who was sitting at the table, he said something like, well, I don't know how you do things here in Kenosha, but I've never seen this done anywhere I've practiced, but maybe you do things differently here in Kenosha. And at that moment, I was like, yeah, they put innocent people in prison here in Wisconsin.
That was in the burden shifting arguments. When they were saying, well, we've mentioned this in that weird little angry, gravely way. We always let these things in the arguments. We've always said that they can at least do these tests, and you've always let it in. He said, well, I've never heard that. Well, he said, I've been doing this for 35 years or whatever, and
thanks for telling on yourself. Thanks for telling on yourself, Gravely. Now we know that you've been illegally putting stuff in front of juries you shouldn't have been for the last 25 years. So how many other defendants? How many other defendants have been railroaded by Gravely and by Binger? How many? We know that Stephen Avery was put in prison for 18 years for a rape he wasn't even in town to commit. And that happened in Wisconsin. Look, this whole thing has been so disappointing. And I can't even imagine how you feel, Solomon, as a member of the family. Because I know you don't believe your brother did this. My position is I don't know if he did it, but that means he should walk, because I can't tell. And that's our process. If you think he probably did it, he's not guilty. If you think he maybe did it, he's not guilty. How many times did Gravely use the word maybe in his closing arguments, by the way? Did anybody?
People were threatening to start a drinking game with his closing argument, with taking a shot every time he said maybe or whatever.
As a seasoned drinker, I highly caution against that. And that's the thing. The fact is, he only needed to say that once. Right. Once. The first time he says maybe this is what happened, it's over. Maybe means maybe not. And if it's a maybe not, it's not.
It's not.
That's it.
And this is the training that I think the jury doesn't have. So Solomon, let me ask you a question. Where do you think that this went wrong? Was there a moment where you felt that this was lost for you, or in looking back, do you now have some, answer as to what really went wrong here?
Arguably, I think that things were going fairly well, because of the number of mistakes that the prosecution had made, because of the slip-ups, because the incorrect timeline, because he didn't verify his opening statements at all. He misrepresented a bunch of facts, and a bunch of his witnesses impeached themselves on the stand. I think that the one moment that it really turned was when Schrader allowed the line of questioning by the prosecution about this hypothetical firearm, this imaginary firearm.
Oh, I didn't get to this part yet. What day was this?
That was on my niece's testimony.
Yeah, I haven't got there yet, so I haven't seen that one. So tell me, what happened?
So they had an argument, or they sent the jury out of the room specifically for this one, because Gravely was going to go into this. And it was something that was a potential other acts issue, and he wanted to use it as some kind of emotional appeal, like most of his case was, to appeal to the jury. And he got my niece to say that she was threatened with this firearm. I was threatened with that gun, is I believe what she had said on the stand, which is demonstrably false. It is absolutely unequivocally false. Not only would it would never have happened. But my brother never owned a firearm, so it just doesn't make sense. And whatever
Did anyone find this gun? Does the gun
Megan,
exist?
No, it doesn't
wait
exist.
till
It was
you
never
get
found.
there. In rebuttal, the defense was going to call a witness. I believe he was a police officer.
Yeah.
They were going to call a police officer as a rebuttal witness to say, no, that weapon was not in Wisconsin. But his daughter had a soccer game out of state and he was not available for trial.
Volleyball, I think.
Volleyball. It was a volleyball game. Yes, he had a volleyball game.
Didn't they have it on
And-
deposition?
Well, his subpoena ran out apparently, but he absented himself from the state, and so they just read a stipulation that he was going to testify. This couldn't have happened the way the witness said it did, and they just read it. And again, reading it is not the same as having the person on the stand to testify about it.
Right.
And to be fair, there was, I believe, other impeachable things to bring, that detective back onto the stand. So, it was going to be a powerful counter witness for the defense, but there were so many things that weren't allowed to be argued in my brother's defense simply because of the rulings that Schrader had made, including, counting, in the opening statements, trying to qualify the suspicious text message from Rebecca Jekyll to Sadie as a
huge
Denny argument, which is again false. It's not.
I also think though that Schrader really bothered me during that argument when he said to the defense, if you had brought this as a Denny motion, I might have given it to you. Like, wait a minute. So file one now. Could she have filed one then? Because at that point it's like, wait a minute, you're now saying, well, too bad you didn't, so you can't, even though this is pretty good information.
So the ruling that he made at the time, I believe, was to give the defense literally that night and the following morning to the prosecution to rebut the Denny motion in this circumstance. The problem was that there was not a Denny argument or a Denny motion to be made on the amount of information that they had and the quality of the statement. The statement was never meant to be a Denny argument. It was never a finger point. It did not provide the motive, the means, and the opportunity to commit the crime instead of my brother. It was not a Denny argument. It was not a Denny case to present. It didn't qualify as the motion. It was never intended to be that.
Well, Schrader made it sound like it could have been.
Well, they did because he cut them off, and that was the problem. Right. It was just the beginning. Saying we have these text messages. You didn't look into her, and she was going to continue that with, well, you have two guys that randomly read something on the internet and show up in the guy's backyard and demand answers. You have this guy. He owed money to everybody and their pet dog around town. You didn't look at any of them, but they just got the first thing out, and that was Nicole's argument was, I'm not doing this to point the finger at her. I'm doing it to show you that everybody else could have done it.
That the cops were negligent in their investigation. Which,
correct.
Can we go back to the Denny motion in the first place? I looked it up because I'm like, I've never heard of this. My sister had never heard of it. It is state specific to Wisconsin.
Yep.
And I personally think it's a total violation of the defense's right to defend their client by pointing to reasonable doubt. You are, in order to saying that you have to put a motion before a judge to finger another suspect, to say maybe this guy did it or maybe this woman did it, is, I think, a total violation of his right to a defense. I don't know why Wisconsin allows this, other than the fact that Wisconsin just loves to put people in prison and doesn't want defense to mount a robust defense.
To my understanding, the Denny law actually expanded how the state handled the finger point accusation or providing an alternate actor from the previous ruling, which I think had carried over from like the late 1800s. So it had actually expanded it to create a situation where if you had all three situations met, then the judge was obligated to let you make that argument. And it's to prevent, it's just nonsense from being spewed into the court and people just shouting that it could have been anyone in the room, right? You had to present a viable logical argument that it could have been someone else, which I believe was done in this case, but Schrader had denied it, and that was one of the problems that I had. But I can't go into the details on anything that was discussed on that. That's all part of the appellate case. But realistically, if you can provide those things, then you should be able to present it to the court. And he just said, "Well, I don't think it's strong enough, so I'm going to deny it," even though it was arguably very strong in how to present it to the court. So, but prior to that, I believe the Supreme Court decision on how to present an other actor for what you're accused of was a more stringent case. You almost had to prove that they had done the crime, that to the point that you would be the prosecutor proving it to the court. And because the bar was set so high, in order to prove another actor, they actually reduced it to those three circumstances, so you could provide that information. Is it enough?
Still seems crazy to me. I mean, a jury can see through, a desperate defense attorney just pointing a finger at anybody, but they can also look at real information like that text message that's really suspicious. There's all kinds of things that they could be looking at. Like, for instance, why didn't the police swab the light switches or look in the freezer or swab the freezer handle? And how do we know that those things were actually in the freezer? Because it was his mother who found them. How do we know they were really there in the first place? This is all, nothing that was done about this was done correctly, starting from the police investigation throughout this trial. So
I thought it was Sadie that found the stuff in the freezer.
No, it was Celia.
It was the mother.
It was the mother.
All right. Okay.
So Celia Patterson was cleaning out the apartment
right.
after it was released from police custody, and then she found the credit cards and the phone in the freezer. It was towards the end of May when that happened. It was a couple weeks later.
Okay.
And the other thing was, they had specifically blood splatter behind the shoe rack. There's that tray that was by the door, and the shoe tray was actually stood up against the wall. So it was clearly manipulated. And then when Nicole asked, I forget which police officer, it might have been Van Wee, but when she asked him where Mr. Gutierrez's shoes were, the look on his face was just like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Like, it never occurred to them that Gutierrez's shoes weren't there. I mean, did someone attack him? Probably, right? I mean,
yeah, probably. It sounds like it.
Did
Looks
he
like
walk
it.
out with a head wound and amnesia? Maybe.
That happened to a neighbor of mine. I've actually, the man fell and hit his head and walked away from his family, disappeared. No one heard from him for almost a year. Then they found him and he had no recollection of any of it. And he ended up living a totally separate life from his family. They got divorced. He didn't see his kids anymore. Like, it's just a different guy. There are too many questions. That the amount of blood that was found at the crime scene did not appear to be enough blood to say for sure someone was dead or bled out, despite the prosecution trying to make it sound like a scene from Dexter. It wasn't. I think he was obviously hurt in some way, but we don't know what happened to him. We literally don't know. And that's the problem. And this jury coming down with a guilty verdict with so little information, all these things we don't know. It's frightening. Flux, thank you for the super chat. Says, I rather enjoyed OA testimony about the weed than showed a bud and goes, what is that? LMAO, but that should have been a red flag to the jurors.
Well, I mean, look at what was proved at trial. The missing person's blood was all over the missing person's house. Zachariah Anderson's DNA was all over Zachariah's clothes. There's nothing in the van that tests positive for blood. The end.
And
that is all the conclusive evidence that I can recall.
If there was a murder in that house, how was there no other DNA from the murderer in that apartment?
Well, matter of fact,
Nothing.
there was DNA from the probable murderer on the cell phone that they found in the freezer. There were 2 alleles that they found on the cell phone, on Mr. Gutierrez's cell phone, that tested absolutely negative, completely excluded Zach. So again, they had DNA evidence that actually exonerated him as being involved in handling this guy's, personal effects and going through his wallet. But then they refused to even recognize that
Did they
he
rule
was
out?
never taken to the crime scene.
Did they rule out the mother's DNA from the phone?
Yeah.
So you're telling me that there was unidentified
Yeah.
DNA on the phone that
Yep.
didn't belong to Zachariah and
Correct.
didn't belong to the victim
Correct.
or anyone they know?
Correct.
And
There
was
was
it
also 2 open
male
beer
or
bottles.
female? Was it male or female?
They just said that it was 2 alleles, and they didn't get into it. I don't believe that they gendered the alleles.
What? This
Mhm.
is so crazy that someone can go to jail on this. It's crazy. And for the people who look, since I announced that I was going to be doing this interview, I've had a couple of people say, oh, he's absolutely guilty, and here are the reasons why. And one of them, and I'm just going to bring it up because a bunch of people have said stupid stuff about this. One of the reasons for this is that people seem to have a negative opinion of your brother based on the state of his house when the photographs were taken. So let's just get to it. The state of his house, it's pretty messy. And for some reason, even though that has nothing to do with being a murderer, a lot of people have messy homes. I'd like you all to take a look around your house right now and tell me that it's, in a state of perfectness. But that's something that people are kind of they're latching on to say that, oh, well, he must have done it. Look at his house. That's not a safe house for children.
So as it turns out,
Yeah.
the reason why the house was gutted was that it's an old, like farm adjacent house. It was a little cottage, little Cape Cod, and it had been built about the turn of the previous century. It was, I think, around 1908 or something like that. But the electrical that was ran was failing in the house. So when Zach was living in California, we gutted the whole first floor of the house very specifically so we could pull new wiring and eliminate all the fire hazards. Zach and I were talking about how to rearrange the stairs, the kitchen, the bathroom, and the whole layout of the house. And he couldn't make up his mind which direction to go. And then we didn't finish the project because he specifically was not ready to pull the trigger on a specific layout for the house. And then I had to go back to work and do all kinds of things. And then he decided that he was just going to do it himself when he came back at some point. So instead of spending the money on remodeling his house, he took the money that he had received from his settlement with AT&T and then used it to invest in rental properties and other things to try and further his passive income stream, because he wanted to make sure that he could generate enough income to help support the family, because people need money at times when emergencies come up, and then have something for his children. So putting the walls back together was just not high on his priority. He's just a guy that was willing to live with less. He would literally eat spinach, mixed vegetables, and boiled chicken all the time if he could, specifically just because it was inexpensive and nutritious. And that's all he did. He didn't care.
Yeah, I just want to point out that my upstairs is currently in this same state because my husband ripped out floors and is replacing things. So we have piles of stuff to walk over in the hallway right now because rooms are being, redone. And that's going to be temporarily there for a while. Like, that happens. And I just, and I realize that
modern day rural America.
You've got it. But
look at this is what people think.
These are people on a jury, okay? This is what people think. They see a picture of a messy house and they think, well, there's something wrong with you. That, this is the problem. All of this stuff is prejudicial without an explanation of, like, why is it like this? Without hearing, oh, well, he's in the middle of a construction project. Oh, that makes sense. We've all been there. It just gets out there.
Well, look, we moved into, my dad moved into the house he lived in in 1976. We moved in there until my mother passed away, and then he moved into a retirement community last year. So from 1976 until 2022, and never finished the basement. Why? Because the kids are just down there,
Yeah.
They have the light switch, they have the heat, they've got a little patch of carpet. That's just rural America.
Mm-hmm. And it has nothing to do with the case. So much of the stuff of the reasons why people think he's guilty have nothing to do with the case. But what was really interesting was watching Law and Crime and Court TV's chat change their minds about his guilt. And I was actually feeling a little hopeful that the jury would be the same as the people watching, because they were all for the prosecution in the beginning. And by the end, they were not. So,
well, that's what I said. I said the prosecution did such a bad job in this trial that Law and Crime was only 60% in favor of the prosecution at the end. That's how bad they say.
And that's unbelievable. Marloka, thanks for the super chat, says, me every day I got to clean the house. Yes. I mean, it's all of us. Like, we're trying to keep up, and it's a silly thing to judge a person on the state of their house. It's not okay to put someone in jail because you think he's a bad housekeeper. That's ridiculous.
I mean, moreover, that $50,000 that they found underneath that, the one chair or whatever, like he already bought 3 rental properties. He used to buy, I guess, properties off sheriff's sale. So when a house is foreclosed on, the state will take possession of it, and then it goes up for auction again in a public auction. You go there, and you usually have to have a fair sum of cash to then buy a property straight out. So you go and you pick up the deed, and it clears the deed of anything that any liens or anything like that might have been placed on it. And there's some other complications that exist with doing this, but he'd already done it 3 times. And he and I had specifically spoken about a couple of different properties, one of them being the property that Sadie lived in at the time that he was interested in trying to buy. So he was waiting for opportunities to pick up another property to then again increase that income stream. And that was a very important aspect to our relationship, how we plan the future. The 3 of us, Josh, Zach, and I, would sit down, we would look at properties where they were listed, and then we would talk about the pros and cons, what the rents were, and all kinds of stuff like that. So that was part of the
Did the defense bring up this history of using large amounts of cash for that purpose?
No, I don't know that they were allowed to. There was a lot of things that the prosecution had ruled or had objected to for it being irrelevant to the argument as it stood. I mean, to be fair, it was probably irrelevant for them to bring up the $50,000 in cash underneath the chair anyway. It's not enough money to run away with, right? It's not enough money to start over again. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it's not enough money to run away for a very long time. So, no. Okay, so we know that the family is now going to have to go through a years-long appeals process. Where are you in that? Do you have an appellate attorney? Has that been and have you been talking to Zach? How is he doing? Has he been moved to prison yet? Because I know that all is things will get a little better for him in a prison versus jail. So where are you at with that?
Realistically, at this point in time, discussing what the costs are. That's where we're at. So we need to figure out a couple of key factors. Are we able to find exculpatory evidence? And for those of you that don't know what exculpatory is, it's evidence that can be presented to the court that would change the jury's decision, because it would be a proof or evidence, physical evidence that would indicate that maybe somebody else had committed this crime, or would absolutely indicate that he was innocent of the accusation. So that would be what we would need to find and figure out, is exculpatory evidence, effectively doing a police investigation into this to prove that he didn't do this without the ability to subpoena people, question them, or do any of the other things that police are allowed to do. And without the unlimited budget that police and government agencies have in order to accomplish this. So that's one of the things that we need to look at. We need to look at the private investigators to figure out if we had bias, in the courtroom, where the bias, lies. We have to figure out a bunch of things that have to do with the mechanics of how this case went in the first place. And then we also have to figure out the monetary ceiling or the monetary value, the bar set for an appellate lawyer. As far as our understanding and whom we've talked to insofar, that's somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000.
Wow.
So that's just another massive chunk of cash on top of the, a very large sum of money. I don't want to say the amount of money that we spent on lawyers already in just the defense and experts and everything that we've already paid for, or Zach's already paid for with his life savings, effectively, to try and present a defense to the court, which was by and large barred from being presented to the court by decisions made by the judge. So it was frustrating from go, and the only way forward is to try and build enough momentum and get enough people to understand, the principles of, as Jeff said, innocent unless proven guilty. The idea, the what should be a paragon of justice in our nation of someone who's accused of a crime's innocence. To try and get that message out there that if we allow the state to continue to persecute us as individual citizens based on finger point accusations and circumstantial evidence, that opens up the door to any one of us anywhere from being thrown in prison for life, effectively, on legitimately trumped up charges, right? So this is a situation where the state was allowed to bring in a bunch of crap to prove that my brother was a bad guy, and then lock him up for life, and try and sway the minds of the jury for that. And it didn't prove the case. It just didn't.
For those of you watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button. The likes is at just an embarrassing rate, you guys. We've got 347 of you here and like 167 likes. Hit the thumb, for crying out loud, unless you're,
and do that because that's what tells YouTube there's something exciting going on and there's something interesting going on here, and that will draw more people to this issue. The more likes there are, the more likely YouTube is going to refer this video to people and to get them to watch it and to get this message out.
For all of you in the hashtag, free Zachariah Anderson, please hit the like. Subscribe to Megan's channel. Continue to like Jeff's videos. The more it gets circulated, the more awareness we can raise, the more we can get legitimately the truth of the matter out to the public, because that's the problem, is that they were presented a very biased, one-sided view of what happened in those court proceedings. We had a prosecutor that was mouthing testimony, that was giving hand signals in court, that was doing things that should, in my opinion, disbar him, right? This is a situation that he had specifically refused to recuse himself after he made himself a witness, and the judge allowed it. And that was discussed openly in the court. Very specifically made himself a witness, and then was still allowed to prosecute the case. This is not how our justice system is supposed to operate. This is injustice. This is a miscarriage of the integrity of our system.
That's right. And also, if you guys go into the description of this stream on both YouTube and Rumble, you will find the GiveSendGo link if you want to help with Zachariah's with his appeal. It's a huge burden on the family to do this. There is no, the state has an unlimited budget to put you in jail, and unless you are a independently wealthy, good luck being able to appeal. So I will drop it in the chat as well, but I also want you guys to please share it. If you can't give to it, definitely share it and let people know this, at the very least, he deserves to be heard again. Like, this is so much that went on is just nuts to me. It's so much that went on is just nuts. Does your brother, I know that, does your brother, growing up, you probably know him better than most people. Did it ever occur to you at any time that maybe he did do this. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did it.
So I mean, I tried to put myself in the headspace of considering that I didn't want to be the person after the trial, after evidence was presented, right? That I would have been the person caught in the headlights, like, oh, I could have never have seen this in him. You know who I'm talking about, the family member or the close friend or whoever it is after a trial that is very clearly presenting a case. I didn't want to be that person, that stood there and was just blindsided by all this information. And I could not, even after trying to figure out a headspace that he could have possibly been in to commit this crime, I could not piece it together that it was him. He had very specifically focused on the child custody case that was coming up about a month after he was arrested. There was a family court case that they had on the schedule already, that he and Sadie were going to court to argue over the physical placement, the legal custody, and then child support, most likely, of their 3 children. And he was emptying his house out and cleaning out old garbage and doing things like that specifically to create space and make it safe for them and do things like that. He was making repairs and spending money on the house, which he had refused to do before that, specifically to make it safe for the kids. And it wasn't to that point yet, obviously. You saw the inside of the house, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't something that he was working on and going to put floor down and cover up the walls and do stuff like that. But in the meantime, he had to try and build a case against Sadie for child custody. And I mean, I heard some commentary, I think on your stream, Jeff, where they talked about how this case was specifically, a family court case wrapped up in a murder trial. And that was like this weird kind of marriage of the two, is that Sadie had a vested interest in trying to appropriate Zach as a monster. She very specifically weaponized the police. She had done it multiple times previously, and she had already set this up as something that she was going to lean into. If you really look at the text messages presented, there was zero discussion of Zach being a stalker until he had specifically told her that they were going to court for the kids. Right before that,
in custody cases, and I have studied this for years. I've reported on corruption in family court. I'm actually working on putting together a book of all my articles on this. People will do anything to get a leg up on one another in family court. And unbelievably, lawyers are responsible for most of it. Lawyers are responsible for creating these silver bullets that women or men will use against their spouse or ex-spouse to get a leg up in court. This is an old story. This is nothing new. I'm not shocked by that at all, by someone using something or making something up to look better in front of a judge. Right.
And I mean, embellishing the situation with Olivia with my niece to try and set the stage for him being this monster, or that he was trying to do this. The reality was that, like, in the situation where she drove down to Rosalio's house, was my niece even in school? It was during the COVID release, right? So then my, at the time, 12-year-old niece, legally able to stay home, right, is left at home. But this is not a new behavior. We have a situation where she left to go do what she wanted to do, and this was a complaint that my brother had made to me multiple times, that Sadie had other hobbies and things like that. She'd go out with friends. She was out playing fistball. She would find some friend or some family friend or whoever it was in her eyes, her father, who was who actually was a convicted pedophile, things like that, to watch the children. And that drove my brother insane. And there was nothing that he could do about it. He was on the road a lot for his job. and it was a problem between them. It was always a problem between them in this idea that how safe are our children, and so we have all of this kind of history that's built up to why he might have approached my niece and said, if she leaves you home alone, you need to call me and call the police. And how that was twisted into what was testified to on the stand, I don't know. I don't know how that imagination had come to fruition, but the reality was,
the prosecution tried to paint your brother as someone who was obsessed with Sadie, and still possibly in love with her, wanting to get back together with her, and enraged with jealousy. Is that true? Because it doesn't seem true. It seems like he had a girlfriend and another life going on. And perhaps, to me, I got the impression that he was concerned about what was going on at Sadie's house and in her life, because his children are living there. Not, is this upset? Was it Law and Crime that dubbed it the obsessed boyfriend murder trial? And I thought that's one of those headlines that's misleading. Is that
that's
the case?
The thing, Megan? That was the thing. Is like, I thought that Solomon and Zenith both came into my stream together, but they both said they came in to yell at me for using that exact headline, the obsessed boyfriend murder trial.
That wasn't the point of us joining your channel.
Well, it's okay. We're used to being yelled at, so it's no big deal.
After watching the first day, the prosecution's opening and the defense's 20 minutes of opening, I thought, well, this is bullshit. And I had to change the headline just out of good conscience. And that's the very first time I've ever done that, because it was just so ridiculous. It was just so clearly an allegation. And I felt bad for having it up there for a day. So I thought it was kind of funny they were both going to call me on the carpet for that. And rightfully so.
But the reality is that there was still, they were still lovey-dovey. They had a couple of arguments here and there, but like, it's still, Z-Bear XOXO. They were spending time together, inviting him over for dinner and doing all this stuff. It's not that they were just, completely estranged. And they had even testified, Sadie testified that they were like on and off again, right? They had disagreements, and there was a history of them, her saying, I need a little bit of space, and he'd give her a little bit of space. They didn't break up over that. And then he'd go back to her and say, hey, I still love you. And they would figure it out. This is not like a unique or new situation for their relationship. This is something that it was a established behavior pattern. It is, as legally you would call it, a modus operandi, right? Mm-hmm. This was a mode of behavior. They'd done this. This is not new. And for her to testify that she had made it absolutely crystal clear that she had moved on, it was completely false. And that was in the evidence. Absolutely.
Well, and it was also clearly, go ahead, sorry, maybe.
It just doesn't seem to me that a man who also has a girlfriend and knows that the ex has a boyfriend is going to be enraged by the boyfriend when he's got a girlfriend. Also, it's kind of like they're in the same situation where they may still love each other, but they're both having other relationships. I don't know. I mean, is he a jealous person? Was this in his history to be jealous? Because most jealous people have had instances of that before. You don't just become jealous out of nowhere.
He was not an obsessed lover. He very specifically, if he was going to be with someone, he wanted them to be with him, right? I think that's natural for us to want.
It's pretty normal.
That type of relationship, right? But as far as being jealous or overly upset about it, no. He would just say, well, if that's the case, then I'll move on. And that had happened, in his life over and over again. It wasn't a new thing. So he was never a jealous man like that. Did he feel jealousy as an emotion? Sure. I mean, and that was what those recordings had talked about when they played the recordings of their conversation, where he said, I, of course, still love you. I will always love you. I made 3 beautiful children with you. Of course, I'm jealous that you've moved on, but we're supposed to be doing something else, right? And that emotional rubber band being stretched had a lot to do with Sadie toying with him. So
Mm.
how can you say that manipulation wasn't there? You know, it's very specifically demonstrated in, you know, good night, Z-Bear, XOXO, you know, when they're supposed to be, you know, broken up or whatever it might have been, you know, like this is not
Relationships are complicated.
breakup.
And
Yeah.
Solomon, Ashley has a good question here. Do the sales of shirts and sweatshirts go to the appeal fund?
Yes. So the sales, we have our site actually on the Facebook group, and I think I might have sent you the links.
Yeah,
to
I linked them to the description of this video. So if you guys want to go in the description, you can find the links to the GoFundMe, the t-shirt sales, sweatshirt sales, and also the Facebook group. They're all there in the description of of this particular stream.
If you'd like to go buy a shirt and not just give money out, you know, please go buy a shirt. You know, we have the, you know, the I love you sign, right? And that was a story that Zach had told. That's actually on our Facebook group about how this started and why it was so important, and demonstrated his love for his children, whom he didn't get to see, and he still can't. The only time that he has seen any of his children is when my niece testified against him in court for, you know, it's 35 months now, you know, a couple days short of 35 months, you know, from the day that he was arrested, or a couple days before he was arrested. You know, he hasn't seen or heard from his children since. There's been a gag order in place, and that kills him. You know, you asked how he was doing right now. He desperately misses his children. He does. He misses his kids. He just, it tears him up inside being completely isolated from them. And the gag order still stands. You know, they actually had a gag order on Zach, between Zach and Josh and me. So Zach couldn't even communicate directly to Josh or me via phone call, letter, or any other means.
This is something prosecutors do, by the way, I believe, to break down the emotional support of the person that they are prosecuting. They did it to Cynthia Absug. They put a protective order against her speaking to any member of her family for 3 years. 3 years she wasn't allowed to speak to her own mother, because, and the excuse they gave is that was the only way they could safely let her child, who they took away from her, speak to his family if she had no contact with them, because they didn't want her getting information through them about him, which is so sick. Anyway, why wouldn't you tell a mother how her son is doing? I mean, this is the sort of thing they do that I think is emotionally manipulating the defendant into taking a plea deal, into making it stop, so that the emotional terrorism can stop. I hate this so much. Let me get to the super chats real quick. Julie O says, thanks for sharing this with all of us. Chat, we need to get attention on this. If it can happen to Zach with zero evidence, it could happen to you. That's so true. And also, Julie sent another one, thank you very much, about Zach and Sadie saying they were on a break. Nice. Famous Friends reference there. The t-shirts really are lovely. If I have put the link to the t-shirts in the description of this video, and also the sweatshirts, but I will drop it in the chats as well on Locals, meganfox.locals.com, on Rumble, and on the YouTube chat. I'll do that now.
Thank you. And we have the free Zachariah Anderson Facebook group too. For those of you that want to join us that haven't already, you know, please join us. You know, the more voices we have, the better. The more people that we have, you know, join together to then, you know, to really spread the word, the truth, because that's what this is about. This is about spreading the truth of the situation. And there's been a very, very one-sided and warped view of reality presented in the courtroom. You know, there was one piece of the only other piece of evidence that they had cited was this DNA that was in the back of Zach's van. But the prosecutor had spun and lied to the press and told everybody that it was absolutely blood, when not a single one of the three different Milwaukee crime lab, or the Wisconsin crime lab people that took the stand could scientifically verify that it was blood. And moreover, one of the representatives specifically said that there was not a single trace of DNA evidence in the van. You know, when they luminol tested the van, it was totally dark. There was nothing in there. So, you know, there's a few different compounds that can make luminol test positive. Bleach can, you know, they said that it smelt of bleach, but there was no evidence of bleach being used in the van. You know, and then there's this brownish red stain that was on the visor above the driver's side, I think on the steering wheel, on the floorboard, on next to the driver's side sliding door, on the rear driver's side wheel well. There was these reddish brown streaks, and then there was one pinhead-sized dot that was on the other side, very specifically on the passenger side rear, right next to the lift gate, right on the back. And this spot is what they said tested positive for Mr. Gutierrez's DNA. They said that it was a single source male that definitely did not exclude Mr. Gutierrez. And that is okay to present to the court. That's factual. That's what scientifically they found. But there's also a bunch of issues with why or how it potentially got there, up to and including the fact that Sadie had specifically texted with Rosalio, giving him Zach's address and putting him up to this idea that he should go mess with Zach in retort for the accusation that Zach had gone into his vehicle. So that was already put out there and specifically set it up and told him to do it. And then in part of that conversation, you know, Rosalio says that he wasn't afraid of my brother, and that he wanted my brother to know who beat him up and maybe broke a leg, you know, and so we've got these overt threats between the two of them that Sadie is specifically, you know, trying to get Mr. Gutierrez worked up over a situation in their conversations to then put him up against my brother. And then in her conversation with Rebecca Jekyll, which we mentioned earlier, that she had a conversation about how it will happen in the next week, and you don't know when, you don't know who, you know, will do it, and then mysteriously Mr. Gutierrez goes missing. What situations, like when I heard that text message read aloud in court, it was my understanding that Sadie had not put one hit on my brother, but two, right? That was my personal take on what had happened there. I said, wait a minute, did she ask two people to go try and beat the daylights out of my brother, like two different avenues to get it done because they were going to go to family court? Like, this is crazy.
Well, the end result of what happened here is that Sadie was given full custody, wasn't she?
She sure was.
Without having to go to court.
Yep. And
without having to go through a trial.
After he was arrested.
Wait, say that again?
So after he was arrested, so after the accusation that she made, which implicated him in this crime, she then went to the police station and filed a restraining order against him after he was arrested, so she could then go to family court and get custody of the children.
See, there's just a lot here. There's just a lot here of motives for other people to have had a hand in whatever happened here. And the truth is, we don't know what happened to Mr. Gutierrez. We have no idea where he is, what happened to him, who did it, if anybody. And there's no possible way that any jury could have come to any real conclusion about what happened here. The whole thing was smoke and mirrors. And the way our justice system works, Zachariah should absolutely be a free man. Whether or not he had anything to do with the disappearance of the victim or the alleged victim, because there's no, we don't know what happened. We don't. Still,
Megan, like, consider that they even testified in court that there were 15 law enforcement agencies, which included the FBI. Okay, 15 law enforcement agencies. There were police canine units, scuba teams. They had drone teams and ATV teams that searched. I believe it was eight different. I think it was 8 different crime scenes or potential crime scenes that they had subpoenaed for searches. So you had 15 law enforcement agents, thousands of hours, millions of dollars that they spent in the machinery, the labor to perform these searches, the time to review all of this evidence, the time for the attorney to review it all and to try and build a case, the time for the court itself, millions and millions of dollars to try and prove that my brother committed this crime. And they came back with one pinhead-sized spot of DNA in the back of his van that had other explanations to why it was there. And that's how they got this guilty verdict.
They didn't tell us what type of DNA it was either. We don't know if it was touch DNA or blood DNA or saliva DNA. And if it were touch DNA is transferred over and over and over again. I could shake Jeff's hand and then shake your hand, and now Jeff's DNA is on you. And then you could take that hand and wipe it down your pants, and now it's on your pants. Anything, and it lasts for a really long time. So touch DNA doesn't mean anything. Sadie touched her boyfriend, and then may have given Zach a hug at some point, and that got on his hands, which got on the van that he was opening the door and put his hand there. He could have transferred it himself.
The police could have transferred it.
The police could have transferred it.
Hypothetically, Detective Anschutz was one of the people processing the crime scene down in Kenosha. He was also one of the detectives that drove all the way up to Mequon to perform this search warrant to arrest my brother when he called 911, because what he saw was two men, one of them that was armed, that trespassed on his property. So he called for help like a normal person would. Right. When two people walk onto your property, one of them appears to be armed, looking in your windows and then trying to approach you and ask you who if you are the person they're looking for. Are you going to tell them the truth? No. You're going to definitely lie to them to get them off your property to protect your safety.
Yeah, I thought that was ridiculous. I don't understand the super chat, Meng, so I will ask here.
Oh, my God.
Remember the fist bump response when Sadie told RG she wanted him to be her person. I don't understand this. I probably haven't got there yet. What happened?
So the weekend of the disappearance, right? There was a situation where apparently Sadie testified that she went to Mr. Gutierrez's apartment on the night of the 16th. So the day before, about a day before, almost 24 hours before, Mr. Gutierrez hypothetically goes missing. She goes down there, spends a few hours with Mr. Gutierrez and his children, and then leaves just before midnight, right around midnight, something like that, leaves and goes home. Either that night or the following morning, she texts him and says, I think I want you to be my person for a while. And I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of her message to him. And he just, I call it a fist bump, I think, and a fist bump in one of my interviews. Yeah. But realistically, instead of like saying anything back to her, like acknowledging and appreciating the emotional display that she had presented to him in that message, he just liked or hearted, in response, like an iPhone, you can like someone's text message. That was all he did, is that he hit like the heart button or whatever it is, the emoji in response to it, as opposed to actually acknowledging it and talking about it, which is why it's just a fist bump, like, cool story, bro. Thanks for unloading that emotional, sentiment to me.
And then he's never heard from again.
Right. And then that night he has another girl coming over.
Right. He's got this other girl. How come no one bothered to look into or question Sadie about, well, how were you feeling about the fact that he was seeing other people?
Well, they asked her that on the stand.
Oh, yeah. I didn't get to her. I didn't get to that yet.
Yeah. She didn't know, and it wouldn't have bothered her anyway.
Oh, my God.
Julio,
thank you for the super chat. Says the second Facebook girlfriend seemed afraid to say anything. It was so weird to me. Like, did she see something when she got there? I don't know. It was just weird. Was there a second Facebook? I only saw the one testimony by the one girl who drove to meet him and then went to the wrong building. Yeah. Is this that girl? There were three. Okay. So I didn't get there yet.
Yeah. So there was
Sadie, that one, and another one.
Yeah, so there was Ms. Macias that allegedly left her home at like 8:20 for a 40-minute drive, and then told him that she had arrived at 9:40-ish, 9:45. So there's like a 45-minute window that she should have been at the property that is just missing in the timeline. and nobody knows what happened in that 45 minutes or 40 minutes. And she had originally testified that she was looking in the building and she had seen a large black woman coming down the stairs or something like that. And then when Gravely talked to her again to verify her statement, then suddenly her statement changed. Suddenly she was parked in a different place. Somehow multiple witnesses after Gravely spoke with them changed their testimonies, which was, odd to us, from the other side of this, trying to figure out why so many people suddenly had a change of heart or a change of memory from what they had originally testified to when the police canvassed the neighborhood and talked to people and interviewed everyone.
I found it weird when the Facebook acquaintance who had never met him goes to meet him for the first time and then immediately calls the police when he doesn't show up like that or respond to her.
Yeah.
I thought, that doesn't make sense. You met someone on a Facebook dating app. You have no idea who they are or what they're like. And then they don't show up for your date. You call the police? That's so odd to me.
That's when you go, asshole, and they ghosted me, and you go home and you're pissed.
And you go home. Right.
You don't pray for them and call the cops and say you're so worried and concerned like 10 minutes after they don't show up when you're 40 minutes late.
It's very bizarre. It's
Right.
very bizarre to me. That whole thing was bizarre. Julie, thanks again for the super chat. Said, had this been a woman missing who was seeing multiple women, the police would have zeroed in on the one who found the scene and the one who was wanting to be more serious. It does seem like the police really dropped the ball. And the question that I have is it laziness? Is it incompetence? Because you can't call this investigation a good one. I've seen good investigations before. I would say that the investigation into the Idaho 4 case, Brian Kohberger, was one of the examples of a good investigation, and we're going to find out how good. But it certainly seemed to be very thorough. This one, on the other hand, I mean, in the Idaho 4 case, they sent something like 400 samples to the crime lab to be sorted through. In this one, they didn't even bother to look in the freezer. They didn't even bother to swab the light switches. They didn't even bother to swab the handles of the refrigerator. They didn't bother to do any of that or test the cigarette butts outside. Unbelievable to me. That is unbelievable to me. It's like, and it's not the defense's problem if the cops didn't do a good job. It is the defense's right to say, hey, they didn't check any of this. They didn't check their leads. They didn't swab their stuff. And we have no obligation to do that. They're the ones who were supposed to actually investigate this. Yeah, what about the beer bottle? So much didn't get done. I think I'm only an investigative journalist. But hell, if I'm the one in charge of investigating a crime scene, you better believe I'm swabbing everything that anybody's mouth could have been on, anything that anybody's fingers could have been on. I think I would have done a better job than those cops did.
Well, I mean, for the record, they also submitted around 400. I think that was the number that they had testified to, 400 items that they had selected out of all the evidence that they collected to send to the crime lab to run for any sort of evidentiary value. And out of those 400 items, you saw how little came back with any evidence on it. That there was almost nothing. There was really nothing that came out of it. And that's kind of the problem that we have with this whole situation is that their confirmation bias was so strong that even when they got evidence that pointed in a different direction, they would not look the other way. Specifically, when they got DNA evidence out of Mr. Gutierrez's home that pointed the opposite direction, that they were looking in the wrong spot, they still insisted on pressing charges against my brother. And it was really completely circumstantial. And I think that there was a statement made by the previous prosecutor about how they should move forward with this case because they had an easily manipulatable minor witness, and that.
What? Wait a minute. Hold on. Who said that?
I think it was the one that they thanked for all their hard work and their victory lap at the end. I'm pretty sure that was the one that said it. And I wasn't there to hear them say that, but to my understanding, that was the sentiment from the prosecutor's office, is that they had a minor witness that they could manipulate into saying what they needed on the stand to try and get a conviction. And at what point is the system, or that prosecutor's office so completely morally bankrupt? They've lost sight of what their position is in our society and what they're supposed to do, upholding the law, finding justice, which is the truth of a situation. This is just, I could not highlight it enough. It was an egregious miscarriage of justice. This should disgust absolutely every person in our country, if not beyond. This case is absolutely a quintessential case of prosecutorial misconduct and a manipulation of facts just for the sake of a conviction. The Gutierrez family did not get justice. They don't have their son's body, or whatever happened to him. They don't have closure on their child because we have prosecutors and police that got confirmation bias so strongly that it impaired their ability to do their job, to execute their role in this investigation properly.
And this is why we advise you on Shut the Fuck Up Friday to shut the fuck up and never speak to police, because they will absolutely try to convict you and pin a crime on you, even if you have nothing to do with it and you think you're helping. You're not helping anyone. You're not helping by talking to the police without an attorney present ever. So just another reminder to shut the fuck up if the police ever come to you for anything, or if you think don't ever go to the police because you think you're being helpful and helping them solve a crime, because they'll just try to pin it on you. That's just the nature of the job. They need a perp, and you'll do. This case, Jeff, why don't you tell me what were the top couple of things that happened in this case that really shocked you?
Oh wow, give me a minute to think. Well, I mean, first of all, letting in the evidence that the burden shifting evidence that they could have run these tests, and
horrible.
I mean, that never should have come in, and they really, really hamstrung the defense and what they can do from that point. But I thought Nicole did a good job of going, well, we can't go to the crime scene, can we? You're not going to let us in there to do this testing,
right?
Are we?
That was great.
But that's all you can argue. What else can you say? They said they just heard that you could have done it. So you're limited, and you just have to say, well, you wouldn't have let us do it.
Though could have taken just the evidence that the police collected and redone the same tests on that. Yeah. You can't go. They wouldn't have let them in the crime scene to collect their own evidence, and he said that on the stand. That cops said no, we wouldn't. You wouldn't be allowed in. No one's allowed in. Just the police.
And Gravely's behavior through the whole thing.
Yes.
He's just a slimy human being.
His behavior was horrible.
I mean, Jeff, how close to the line did they get for trying to mention my brother's right to silence? I mean, very specifically, Gravely brought it to the judge to say, I want to get as close to accusing him of guilt for not testifying to the police, or that he chose to exercise his right to silence. I want to get as close to that line as you'll let me. The fact that was his goal, that he needed to try and infringe upon my brother's right to silence in order to try and make his case should disgust us.
He wanted to infringe on his right to be presumed innocent too, which is also a constitutional right, which I cannot believe Schrader did not pick up on. It's like, and the thing I didn't like about the defense's argument about the woman, I liked her argument, except she kept using the wrong word. She kept saying it's irrelevant, but it's not irrelevant. It was improper. She was making the wrong argument. It's improper because his right to be presumed innocent is also a constitutional right, just like the right to remain silent. And it should not be infringed on, and it should not be shifted. The burden should not be shifted to the defense in any way. And the jury should not be led to believe that that's appropriate in any way. And they were allowed to believe that. And to me, that was the most egregious moment in the whole thing. I mean, yes, Gravely's behavior, horrible, but we've seen that from Binger. We've seen it from other prosecutors, that's the way they behave. The one in the Cynthia Absug case, that prosecutor, he lied to the jury multiple times. He told lies. And it's somebody said to me, well, the prosecutor's not the prosecutor isn't under oath. And they damn well should be. They shouldn't be allowed to lie to a judge or a jury, and just get away with it.
I mean, Gravely lied through his teeth in the closing statements. He lied in his opening statements. He lied repeatedly. He was nodding to questions before the answer was given by the person on the stand. There was so many
part of it. The whole situation surrounding Munch, the prison house snitch, I was bewildered that even got in. I mean, it wasn't even he told me.
The prison snitch was crazy.
It wasn't even a jailhouse confession in the proper meaning of a jailhouse confession. It wasn't, we were having lunch or we were talking and he told me this. It was he screamed shit out in his dreams. He was talking, he confessed while talking in his sleep. That's how bad that was. And letting in the evidence that he said that he'd stabbed the person, when up to that moment everything was blunt force trauma. And that made it so that Gravely had to completely change his tactics. And that's why he started bringing up this, he went all, Call of Duty battlefield weapon acquisition, where you crush him in the head with a baseball bat. Then you switched weapons to the knife because he had to mention this knife because Munch did it. And then the whole die, motherfucker that he was mouthing. Was so disingenuous. I mean, it was so wrong. And then he just flat out lied and said, "No, I said it twice. I was just following. And if you look at the camera, I only said it twice, not 3 times." And even Schrader said, "Yeah, well, no, they just cut away from you after the second time."
Schrader saw it, but he didn't do anything to him for it.
Nothing.
And Schrader admitted to seeing him do this.
That is
prosecutorial. That is prosecutorial misconduct. He should have been removed. He should have been removed from the trial totally. The one day when Schrader kicked him out of the courtroom and he was so butthurt about it because he made himself a witness in the case, he shouldn't have even been allowed to be continue as the prosecutor after he did that. The fact that the state of Wisconsin allowed Gravely, who made himself a witness in the case, continue to prosecute it. The whole state of Wisconsin should just be like tossed out of the union at this point. I'm just like, can we just?
There's good people here. Hang on.
I just think the entire state and I'm talking about the government, should be somehow sanctioned by the rest of the country. Is to be like, we don't, everyone who's in a court case in Wisconsin right now needs to go to the nearest neighboring state to have their problem worked out in a court, not in Wisconsin, until we fumigate this whole system that allows prosecutors to become witnesses in their own cases and continue prosecuting them.
Well, by my reading of the rules of professional conduct that they read in court, it was pretty clear that he should not have been allowed to continue with that case. It just seemed to be right there in black and white.
I believe the last time a prosecutor had doubled as a witness in a case was, I believe, in 1978, to what I had looked up on the internet, and I can't cite the source or verify it, but I believe that since then there was zero precedence. There was not a single case where it was allowed that a prosecutor was allowed to also bear witness on the case. It gives false credibility to the argument. It makes the trial unfair, and that's a very important aspect of why that rule stands. In this situation, you mentioned trying to move the case. Well, they tried to get it out of, I think it's the 2nd district court, by the way, not the 3rd, but they tried to get it out of the 2nd district court when Schrader was hurt, and they weren't allowed to try the case or retry the case last fall, and it was delayed again. So they tried to make a habeas corpus movement or a motion for the court to then release my brother or to find someone else to try the case. the Chief Justice admitted in the courtroom that he had a personal connection to the alleged victim, that he had to officially recuse himself of the case and couldn't make any decisions beyond dealing with the habeas corpus at the time, and then still denied the habeas corpus and denied the ability to take it to a different district when there was no other judge that could try the case.
God. And also, you know what no one's talking about that really should be talked about more is the fact that this case had already had one mistrial with the same prosecutor for not turning over evidence in the case, correct, to the defense.
Yeah.
What was the evidence that wasn't turned over? Do we know?
Well, it was the change to Miss Macias's testimony, and then there were a bunch of police documents that were released, I believe, afterwards that they didn't give them proper notice. So the jury selection was on a Monday, and they had handed over a bunch of police documents and didn't give them enough time to review them on the Friday before the trial. So that was a big problem.
Well, how is it? Was it Schrader that was the judge at that time too, or was it a different? It was Schrader. How is it that he doesn't? I feel like that should have been it. That should have been over. It should have been over at that point. How do you give the prosecutor another chance when he's already done that in a case? It's just like,
they argued about with or without prejudice in that, and they decided to mistry without prejudice.
Of course.
And so
to give him another shot to be corrupt and heinous, which he proved himself to be. I am so disappointed in the state of Wisconsin. I think if you live in Wisconsin, you should be protesting the state of your justice system. You should be protesting every damn week in front of the court system there that everyone is denied justice when one person is denied justice. See, this is the thing that we don't talk about enough. When one innocent man is denied justice, everyone is denied justice. I have also, by the way, I don't know if you know this, Solomon, but I did a little research because in my investigations into family court corruption, for instance, there have been several scandals involving crime labs that falsified results across this country in drugs for drug tests. And these have been used against people to take their children away and also to put people in prison. There's been one very famous one that happened. There's a Netflix documentary about it. The person who falsified all the drug tests, she's, went to prison. Well, I looked up the Wisconsin crime lab, this crime lab that everyone says is so wonderful. They've had 6 employees disciplined for falsifying results at the crime lab. One of them was drunk at work and doing these tests while drunk. A couple of them had drug problems. This is known information. And guess what? Only a couple of them were suspended, and I'm not sure any of them were fired. So maybe this is good for an appeal. Were any of the 6 employees at the Wisconsin crime lab who were disciplined previously, and this was during the Stephen Avery case, many of them were disciplined, 6 of them, were any of those 6 working on your brother's case? And if they were, and I'm an appellate attorney, I'm saying, I want those thrown out. I want it all tested again. And I want anyone who worked on seriously, maybe it all needs to be retested in a different lab that doesn't have 6 employees who get drunk at work and test samples.
I mean, that was part of the issue with the DNA evidence in the van in the first place, is that you don't know. I mean, I went to school for biochemistry as an undergrad. I ran PCR tests. That was something that we did. There's a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that you can make when doing these tests, right? And to that, those tests, I mean, I'm sure that they've come a long way in the last 20 years since I was in college, but realistically, there's still a margin of error, a margin of scientific error that exists. You have the potential for cross-contamination of specimens in the lab and a bunch of other situations that can arise, that especially in such a small specimen that was taken from the back of the van, that it's arguable that there was a potential for contamination from anything else that was handled in the on the crime scene. And I wasn't working in the crime lab, but realistically, there's a bunch of scenarios that exist that would dictate that in this situation that there is reasonable doubt that DNA evidence is accurate, especially when you place that next to all of the other evidence that was tested, including my brother's drains, the traps in the drains, the septic system, and everything else that would have corroborated this story, right? Nothing, absolutely nothing else tested that belonged to my brother tested positive for Mr. Gutierrez's DNA. Absolutely nothing. So if you have a mountain of evidence that states that there was nothing there that shows us that Mr. Gutierrez was ever, handled by my brother, or any of his DNA was ever on my brother, or was ever spread around his property in any way at all at any point. If you have a mountain of evidence that shows us that it was not there, how can you reasonably take that this one speck, this one spot, only makes sense that it is Mr. Gutierrez? The probability of that is so low that it's not even it should not be recognized as a fact of the trial. It doesn't make sense.
We have some Rumble rants with some questions for you, Solomon. Wicked Sight says, were the two men who showed up at Zach's acquainted with Sadie, and did they investigate those two men who showed up at Zach's with accusations?
The two men that showed up at his house, they actually testified to doing that in trial. That was Michael Campbell and Brandon Hendrickson. Now, Brandon Hendrickson does own a pistol, to my understanding. He claimed that he didn't have it with him at the time when they went up to my brother's house. My understanding is otherwise, but realistically, they showed up at my brother's house after they had supposedly gotten his information through a Facebook investigation, through a changing testimony, because Mr. Campbell gave two conflicting statements to police as to how he got my brother's information, and then they went and paid my brother a visit in a very threatening way, and then they left and then drove apparently to Sadie's house, according to their testimony, and then drove back past my brother's house. Now, mind you, in this area, there's two major freeways that run north and south. My brother lives by the eastern one, much further east, closer to Lake Michigan than where Sadie's house was, which is literally about a couple blocks away from the western north-south freeway that runs on north and south on the north side of Milwaukee. So the fact that they would have driven all the way up there and then driven over to Sadie's to then, he claimed that they drove past my brothers on their way home. It also doesn't make sense, because they could have just gotten on the freeway and driven right back to Kenosha and completely avoided driving through all the country roads all the way back to my brother's residence when they had driven past and had seen the police, as they had arrived at the scene. Gravely had said that Michael Campbell was a hero in the hearing that they had, specifically about the Denny motion against him, and that bothered me very specifically, because in the situation where you have an active police investigation, it doesn't matter at the time if my brother was guilty or innocent or presumed whatever it might have been. They had an active police investigation based on Sadie's testimony. Michael Campbell, in a Facebook post that was found and displayed on the internet, had cited that people that knew anything about Gutierrez's disappearance should contact him or the Kenosha PD. And then he drove all the way up to my brother's house, arrived at my brother's house before the police had shown up at all. They were setting up a perimeter to try and execute a warrant, drove past all the cops, confronted my brother on his property, tipped him off that something was wrong with Mr. Gutierrez, which my brother was confused about, and then left. So that's interfering with a police investigation. He was never charged with interfering with the police investigation. Detective Correa testified on the stand that he specifically told Michael Campbell to not do anything, nothing. And if you look at that Facebook post, which is saved on the internet, Mr. Gutierrez's son found out about him being a missing person from Michael Campbell's Facebook post. That guy didn't have the decency to let anyone in the family find out the proper way, where then it was panic on the internet for this child to find out that his dad was MIA.
God, this is just... The whole thing is just upsetting. It's upsetting. Those of you, if you do have questions, I just want to let you know the chat's going by really fast. So if you have questions for Solomon, super chats will help highlight them so I don't miss them. So make sure, and Rumble Rants as well. Thanks to those of you watching on Rumble. Rumble is great because we're not ever going to get demonetized there. But on YouTube, my channel is pretty much demonetized. So we rely on the super chats. So keep them coming. I appreciate it. And if you guys want to ask questions, make sure that you use the super chat function so that we can see them. What are you... Oh, it's so difficult. How is the family doing? Are you allowed to see your niece? I don't know how. Does he have girls and boys? Your nieces and nephews, or are they all nieces?
It's twin boys and one girl.
And they're quite young, aren't they?
Well, she turns, I think it's 15 in a couple of weeks. In like 2 weeks to the day, I believe. So my niece turns 15 in 2 weeks, and my nephews are 7 going on 8 right now. Going to be 8 and 8.
I'm assuming that it hasn't been easy for you to see them or have a relationship with them since this has all happened. Are you in contact? Are you able to have that?
So, I mean, this was a giant issue, right? We were afraid to then even talk to Sadie because there was a gag order between us and Sadie as well.
Right.
So then we have a situation where, Josh and I, my eldest brother and I, can't talk to Sadie, which means that we alienate ourselves from those kids.
Yeah.
Instantly. And we're afraid that anything that we say to them could be then repeated back to Sadie or twisted back to Sadie. And then it would be deemed as a message from Zach with a gag order that he was not allowed to communicate to Sadie or to the kids. So effectively, the gag order held all of us down and then alienated us from them. We've gotten to see just the kids around Christmas, just after Christmas, when we all get together for every Christmas since Zach was arrested. I have not personally seen the kids in any other circumstance. I believe my dad has visited with them a few times outside of that and spent a bit more time with them. But realistically, no, we can't. And we can't hold that conversation. And, I could see the pain in my niece's eyes, and during the holidays and during other situations where, the rejection of the rest of the family is so painful. We can't do anything about it. We can't talk to her about the situation. We can't go there. The only thing that I ever expressed to her outside of telling her to lay off the boys and stuff like that when she was yelling at them and, when twin boys were fighting in roughhousing during a holiday. Is that I just told her that Zach loves all 3 of them. He just loves them all and he misses them dearly. And that was all I've ever said to her about it and left it at that. And that's true. And that's just the only thing that I could extend. He never told me to do that. He never asked me to say that. And that, when I told him that I did, he actually started crying on the phone. He started bawling like a baby. He said, I didn't tell you to do that. You shouldn't have done that. I didn't tell you to do that. And I said, well, it needed to be said, and left it at that.
Okay, there's an argument happening in the chat that I want to see if we can get to the bottom of. John Gary, it says that I've watched it over and over. I think Jeff misunderstood something and kept making the incorrect claim about the DNA only being not excluded. I will say, Jeff, so far from what I've seen, I have not seen, though, the testimony from the crime lab supervisor or the other people that you told me, throw some doubt on the crime lab technician's story. So why don't we go back through that and see if we can clear this up? This is about the DNA spec.
You're muted, Jeff.
You're muted.
Boomer.
The dogs are snoring, so
We don't mind the dogs snoring.
Now, do you want to take that question, Solomon? Because apparently because here is the crime scene analyst, the woman that first testified. They went through all the testing. They said, well, we tested it for DNA. And whose DNA was it? She said it was Zachariah Anderson's, the defendant's DNA. She said that definitively, but then it was later, I believe it was her supervisor, that the best he would say, the only thing he said that they could say, it was a single source male. It was analyzed and is a single source male profile DNA.
Oh, I believe that it was a single source male that did not exclude Mr. Gutierrez.
Yes. Well, see, that was my next thing, because you're saying it was. They said it was his, but they said it was a male single source donor. It was a male profile DNA, and the defendant could not be excluded as not the defendant. Sorry, the missing person, shall we say?
Mm-hmm.
could not be excluded.
But the where the confusion comes in is that Gravely kept repeating that it absolutely 100% was the alleged victim's DNA.
Yeah, and the analyst woman,
first analyst
she just
said
said
it definitively as well, and then
it's the other witnesses.
Yeah. So, and do you think that it is the defense's fault that they did not hammer that hard enough to show that discrepancy to the jury? Is that possible? Anybody can take this. Solomon, Jeff.
So the question is, how hard can they hammer it? And so if you're going to belabor a point, it might call into I mean, that's the game of chess in the courtroom, right, Jeff? Is that if you're going to focus on a point and you're going to belabor it, then are you giving it more credibility than it deserves? And there's some argument in that, and I can't get into the prosecutors or the defendant, the defense's heads about what exactly their strategy was in how to present this, and what evidence was going to be relevant, and how they could present it to the court that wasn't going to be excluded because it was deemed irrelevant or whatever it may be. And I mean, I've had a couple of conversations back and forth with them, but I can't really get into anything that they had talked about that has to do with it, if that makes sense. So
what Zenit says here is very true, though. Gravely wouldn't let the defense hammer anything. It's true. Whenever the defense was like finally making a point, his objections would completely stop it, shut it down, and then the judge would side with him. And it was like over and over again, this pattern kept happening. And it made me wonder if Schrader's accident contributed to the way he behaved, like whatever the hell happened to him, where he became such a broken down, shadow of his former self in this trial. I barely recognized him from the Rittenhouse trial to this trial. It's like he just slowed down so much, and whether that's from natural aging or the accident that he had, and he's now walking with a cane, and who knows what happened. But he was different during this trial, and I felt like he continued to give the prosecution everything they wanted, and the defense was always left hamstrung and handcuffed, and it was like, well, too bad.
That was by and large the issue at hand, and when it came to even the situation with how quickly Gravely had tried to vet the video footage of Zach trying to, parent his daughter on the stand, when she continued repeatedly to try and mouth statements or questions at him in between.
Oh, that was so maddening. The media did such a hack job on him for that. It's like, how on earth? I couldn't believe it when I heard you on Jeff's show discuss what happened there. They led the world to believe that your brother was giving his daughter the be quiet sign, like don't testify.
The warning signs is what the media was saying. It was warning her. Yeah.
Trying to. I saw on Twitter that they claimed that he was trying to intimidate her.
Right.
You know, I saw a man that loved his daughter and that was just so happy to see her for almost the entire. I mean, regardless of what she was saying on the stand, you know, and with some confusion and a little bit of hurt when she called him the defendant, and that was understandable, I think. But you know, for that whole situation when he was just specifically, you know, he had been actually communicating to his lawyer, asking his lawyer to intervene and get her to stop, but. You know, there was no point where it was a proper thing to do to address the witness, as far as my understanding. But it was an ongoing issue. And then I was sitting in the courtroom that day, and I saw on the other side, you know, the people in the gallery also trying to quiet or parent her, you know, and he was flipping out on the stand, and there was. This was a situation that was just like, why in the Wisconsin legislature, to my understanding, is that there's a proper way that you can address a minor witness's testimony that isn't putting them on the stand in front of the jury, in front of the gallery, in front of everyone. You can dismiss the gallery completely. If you really want to do that, you could specifically do a video testimony by a minor witness.
They could put her behind a screen so that she can't see.
So you could very specifically remove the issue at hand to try and still get a testimony.
Why didn't the judge address it? Why did the judge allow it to go on? Did he notice what was happening?
I don't think that he ever looked at her and saw her mouthing at my brother. He literally, I watched him fall asleep in the courtroom, you know, both on camera and me personally sitting there. I saw him nodding off. You know, he had the live stream up on his computer in front of him. You know, he had missed objections and said, "Oh, I must have missed that exchange." And there was so many situations that he was just not privy to in the courtroom that it made me alarmed for what he was paying attention to in the courtroom. I mean, no, he never saw the interaction. He never saw the interaction between the gallery and the witness. He never saw the interaction. You know, he didn't even notice, you know, my brother, frankly, doing the please stop, you know, motion.
Yeah, because if the judge had been paying attention, he could have explained what happened to the press and to everyone so that it didn't get reported wrong. And I think it was negligent of him not to have noticed, not to have been paying attention in his own courtroom. I'm horrified by this entire thing. And I hope that the appeal, I hope you are able to raise the money. And again, in the description of this video, whether on YouTube or Rumble, please do see, and on Facebook as well, please do, I always forget that I'm also streaming to Facebook. Please do see in the description, there are links to the GoFundMe for the appeal, which is going to be very expensive. There's also links to t-shirts that will also go towards the appeal cost, and the Facebook page, which you can go on and join and be updated on what's going on in this case. Solomon, is there anything, you know, as we're wrapping it up here, is there anything that you really, you know, you didn't get to talk about that you want to talk about, that you want people to know about this case?
I think that consistently, you know, my closing statements have been that this whole trial, this whole investigation has robbed families of justice, has robbed families of their fathers. Both Rosalio Gutierrez's family and my brothers In this situation, putting my brother in prison for life is not justice for Rosalio. Rosalio deserves justice. His family deserves closure. This case should be reopened. This case should be investigated properly. They should find the person that did this and put them in prison for life. The problem is that it's not my brother. And in doing this to my brother, they've created a whole nother family of victims of this crime. It is a miscarriage of the very fabric of justice to tell a lie this egregious. Please, for those of you that really truly believe that Rosalio's family deserves to be taken care of, hopefully they have a crowdsource up for them, for his kids. They deserve it. We're trying to raise money for our family's justice, to make sure that my brother doesn't rot in prison for life. He shouldn't, because he didn't do this.
Thank you. I think that that's profound and true. And I think that when one person is robbed of justice, we all lose justice. And this is something we cannot continue in this country if we want anyone to be safe from false prosecution. And it also, the only way that an investigation is actually going to be done and it will be reopened is if the appeal is successful and this conviction is overturned. Without that, there will never be any reopening of this case. And that's really important. That's why they're raising money for the appeal. It is going to be very expensive. And that's just the way that our justice system is. And I think that that's incredibly unfair, because that means the people who don't have access to money cannot get justice in this system. And that's another problem that we need to talk about more often. There should be resources for people who are... Now, I'm assuming that he is entitled to a state appellate lawyer, I think.
If he qualifies.
Oh, he has to qualify? You mean because of... Are you kidding? You don't have the right to an appellate attorney in a criminal?
Not if you can afford your own.
Oh, that's terrible. Wait, but you do have a right to the public defender on the first charge? Is that, I mean, on the first?
Not if you can afford your own. You have to be indigent to
Holy crap. I didn't know that. See, this is all so wrong. It's all so wrong. I'm assuming, though, that the first trial probably nearly bankrupted him. So perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps he will. Then again, you have to ask yourself, do I want a publicly paid for Wisconsin attorney who, on the state's payroll, doing anything for me is the question, because that's always a good question as well. God,
it is a good question. Yeah, I agree. And that's honestly Zach's decision, how he wants to handle the rest of this. How to dissolve the remains of his assets. Mm-hmm. He had those income properties that I talked about. People stopped paying rent because they realized that he was in jail and he couldn't collect. So all of his rental properties were taken. So all of that income was gone, foreclosed on and taken. And then his home, is, been basically just falling apart since all this. It's not like anybody's been there to take care of it. So we're trying to maintain it, to the best of our ability, but, there's issues, over there. And the question is, what is the property even, going to be worth? And that's the remainder of everything that he worked for his whole life is in that property. And is it going to be sold then and, dissolve that in order to pay for his legal defense? And I'm not sure. That's all, frankly, his decision to make. And that's not up to us. But, the last thing that I can say in this situation is, one, please go to the GiveSendGo and donate if you're able. If you're unable, I totally understand. Buy a T-shirt if you can. Join us in the movement. There's a quote from Desmond Tutu that I think is relevant to this, and the quote is: "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." Mm-hmm. And in this situation, those of you that are just flies on the wall that are watching this, that don't feel obligated to. You are putting your own future and security at risk, because if this case, in some fluke of injustice, becomes precedential, then how they violated my brother's rights becomes a reference case for everyone else in this state, if not in this country.
Yes, that's true. It's true. I don't have much more to say to that. I just want you guys to make sure that you go check out the GiveSendGo, get a t-shirt if you can. Sentencing is coming up, correct?
May 16th.
On May 16th. And so I know the family would like you to wear your t-shirt on that day and tweet out the hashtag. What is the hashtag again?
Hashtag free Zachariah Anderson.
Free Zachariah Anderson on the day of his sentencing. Wear your t-shirts, tweet pictures. If you don't buy a t-shirt, you can still tweet it out on that day. Schrader has a lot of leeway with the sentencing, and hopefully it will not be the worst that it could possibly be, and he can get started on his appeal. As always, thanks for tuning in, you guys. I hope I didn't miss any super chats. If I did, I'll try and get to them on the next show. Thank you for tuning in on Rumble and on through Locals. Don't forget to sign up on my Locals, meganfox.locals.com. Also, subscribe to Legal Vices if you have not done that. Go to his channel. Make sure you subscribe and like his channel because it's awesome. And we love the dogs and Jeff. And the new dog camera is fantastic. I got to get me one of those. And Solomon, thanks again for being here. I sure appreciate that you took the time to do this. I know it's very hard on your family. And please pass along our best wishes to your family and to Zach, and tell him that we're rooting for him to get justice in this case.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time. Jeff, thanks for being here again. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody. Take care.
Lost, my world is near its end. I almost felt my head is full of a million choices. I am alive, I'm not here to pretend. I love my friends, my heart is filled with a million voices. Oh, this road has many choices. Oh, and my heart, million voices. Come next to me, my friend, embrace the sky. I'm not afraid to fly. It's not the time to say goodbye. Say goodbye. No, I don't wanna No, I don't wanna say goodbye. This time I know my road is near its end. I almost felt my head is full of a million choices. I am alive, I'm not here to pretend. I love my friends, my heart is filled with a million voices. Oh, this road has many choices. And my heart, million voices. Come next to me, my friend, embrace the sky. I'm not afraid to fly. It's not the time to say goodbye. I don't wanna say goodbye. No, I don't wanna say. No, I don't wanna say goodbye.
Denny's problem is he should have come storming in there with a string of garlic and some holy water.
Across the crucifixion.
May the power of Christ compel you.
No, I don't.
You realized his house was infested with succubuses.
Of what? Yes.
Succu loaders.
When you arrived in there for me? I don't remember saying it now. So
no wonder he said drown her before you burn her.
Oh my God.
Your next witness?
Now I know why you wanted to drown her.
Lasis.
Next
That is
witness
also
lives in
by
Romania.
video.
Is that correct?
That begins with Ms.